Hello, my name is Carlos Erban, and tonight I'm here to talk to you about the autofocus system in the Nikon cameras. So before I show you some of the pictures that I took under the different settings, what I like to do is go over what it says in the manual, because I think sometimes going to the manual and understanding carefully or reading carefully what it says is important. Now, even though this is the manual for the D800, it applies for any Nikon camera that has been recently launched. Okay, so let's talk about the first most important thing where there is a lot of confusion. One of them is AFS and AFC. By the way, I'm not going to talk about the automatic modes, because automatic is basically almost like putting in a point and shoot. The camera basically does all the autofocusing for you. But that has advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that you don't have to do too much. The disadvantage is that the camera decides what to focus on, and it may be focusing on something that you don't want to focus, especially when you're going to higher apertures such as 2.8 or f4 and you have a very shallow depth of field. And we'll talk about depth of field in a moment, but just so that some people, if they are not aware of the term, basically depth of field is referred to when you're going to apertures. Well, depth of field actually is for any aperture. It's basically, depth of field is the distance you have to have everything in focus. So when you see, for example, a sharp, let's say portrait, and the background is completely blurred out, that means it was a shallow depth of field. Now you can go as shallow as, there is a 85 1.4, 85 millimeter 1.4, where the eye can be in focus and the ear out of focus. But anyway, the idea here is to talk about the autofocus mode. However, the depth of field is a very important topic, as you will see once we start looking at some of the pictures I took in the Miami Heat game, which is probably the most challenging situation to do autofocus. So the first thing that you should remember is, or to understand, is there is basically two modes: autofocus S or AFS and AFC. Now I don't understand why AFS, the abbreviation, stands for single servo. AF, I guess it's an old term. I don't even know what servo means, but the best way to understand it is that S is for stationary and C is for continuous or moving. And as you read the instruction, is S, for stationary subjects. It says focus when the shutter button is pressed halfway at default. Shutter can be released only when the focus indicator is displayed. So if I'm taking a picture of a portrait and the person is not moving, then the best thing is to go to single servo or AFS. As a matter of fact, I'm going to call it AFS or single, because servo just, again, I think it's just a confusing term. But basically, I'm taking a portrait, right, and I'm focusing on the eye, and your little red point is in the eye, and you hear the beep. And by the way, I recommend you put that beep when it's in focus, and then you should have a very sharp picture. Now, where it gets tricky is when you have moving subjects, and when you have moving subjects, that's when you should use AFC. Now, AFC, as it says here, and this is the part that is tricky. Why is it that AFC is for continuous or moving subjects? Because the camera focuses continuously while the shutter release button is pressed halfway. If the subject moves, the camera will engage in predictive focus tracking to predict the final distance of the subject and adjust focus as necessary. At default, the shutter can be released whether the subject is not in focus. Release priority. So basically what that means is the camera is trying to predict where the subject is moving. Now when it's, and we'll talk about the different points that you should use under what circumstances, but once again, I think the key word here is the camera will engage in predictive focus. So it's not that it's perfect, it's trying to predict that focus, and you will see in a second why sometimes it predicts right and sometimes it doesn't predict right. Okay, so I hope that's clear. Focus release priority, what it means is if you're shooting continuously, let's say 6 frames per second in a sports event or whatever, you can put it so that the camera shoots, or the shutter release shoots, works even if the subject is not in focus. So because the problem is that if you have it, okay, so that is focus priority like it is in AFS, and I think you should, the camera will not allow you to take a picture, okay, until the person is in focus, or until something is in focus, not necessarily the person. So let's look at well, this is, you know, the new cameras have it here, the other cameras have it in the back, but let's talk a little bit about what is this predictive focus. Okay, in AFC mode, the initiate predictive focus if the subject moves toward or away from the camera while the shutter release is pressed halfway. By the way, here they're talking about the AF on button, which is the same thing as the shutter release halfway. But I just wanted to give you these manuals. I don't know, they're written so confusing. I mean, first they're explaining something and then they tell you to go to another page to understand what they mean by predictive focus, and then they're talking about the AF on button. I mean, it's just so confusing the way they write these things, and that's why I'm doing this video, because I can understand why somebody who's bought a new camera and they're trying to understand what the manual says, even if they read the manual, it's just difficult to understand. Okay, so the first thing we talked about is AFS, AFC. Again, the way to remember is S, stationary, C, continuous or moving. Okay, that's the way I think of it. Okay, then the other thing to remember is the AF area mode. So this is how many points, okay, you're gonna tell the camera to help you get that subject in focus. Now when you're in stationary or AFS, you basically have one option, single point. Actually, you have single point automatic, but again, we're not talking about automatic. When you're in dynamic area, oh, you see here another name, AFC, now they call it dynamic. This is just, but anyway, okay. In AFC focus mode, okay, you have different, you can select different focus points depending how many your camera has. Most cameras, I think, have the 9 and the 21. You know, some cameras have 39 maximum, some have 51 maximum. But here is the key thing. The 9 point is choose when there is time to compose a photograph, and I think the example actually is better than the explanation. Example is runners or race cars on a track, so you know which direction they're going. So you know, they're relatively predictable. So 9 points is when it's predictable. 21 points is when they are less predictable. So here they put players at a football game. So I mean, you know which direction they're going, but the ball may be going, you know, it may be unpredictable. And then 51 points is when it's not easily framed, or yeah, when it's not easily framed or they're very fast. I'll be honest with you, I do not use the 51 point, but I encourage you to try it. Okay, the 3D, which I never use, but you should try too, is when you have very erratic. And actually here finally they show a visual of these things, and I wish they showed a visual for each one. Basically what happens when you put the 3D is that you focus here, and as the person moves, the point moves automatically. Now I know a couple of people that love the 3D tracking and use it all the time. The problem is that if you focus incorrectly, right, it is following the incorrect thing. So But anyway, that's just a matter of taste. My goal here is to explain to you each of the different ones, and once in a while I'll tell you what I'll use. Okay, so this is basically it. I mean, there is nothing else. Okay, auto, basically focuses automatically, and it has a mode that basically if there is a person, it will try to look for that person. Okay, so now let me show you what this autofocus in action means. So one of the things, I mean, I rarely use the View NX2, which is the free software now that Nikon has. I think in the past it wouldn't allow you to look at the raw files. Now it does. And if you don't have the one that allows you to do the raw files, you can download it from the Nikon website. You probably notice in my YouTube channel that there is tons of video on Lightroom. So I don't use this software except for one thing that is very useful. It is very useful to tell you and evaluate where you focused or where the camera focused, that red dot. Okay, that when you're looking at your pictures in the LCD and you have that red dot, that's something that you cannot do with Lightroom. The other thing is, you have all the information here that you get with Lightroom too, but I don't remember, for example, if Lightroom tells you which AF area mode you were on. In other words, the only thing I'm saying is if you had a shoot that was difficult and you see a lot of your pictures that were out of focus, it may be worthwhile to use this program to evaluate what happened. So in this basketball game, and I'm gonna go back again to the depth of field, the depth of field definition. By the way, there is an app called Dof Master. Okay, now it used to be free and now I think it's relatively inexpensive. I recommend that you buy it. Okay, the Dof Master basically allows you to put your camera format, the lens, the f-stop, and the distance, and it will tell you how much depth of field you have to get a subject in focus. So in this particular case, I was most of the time at 200 millimeters, okay, with a full frame camera. So I'm using the D800. By the way, you have to choose if it's full frame or cropped. So if it's a crop camera like the D7000 300 or 5200, any of those cameras, those are cropped. The f-stop was 2.8. I was shooting at 2.8 and I was about 50 feet. Now what that says is that my depth of field is only 3 feet. Now the way it works is if I'm pointing here, it's not 3 feet behind the elbow. It's actually 1 foot in front of the elbow and 2 feet behind the elbow. So that's what is going to be in focus. So what I wanted to show you, and this is a good example where sometimes, so obviously I put it in continuous, no question about it. You definitely want to put it in continuous. I was at 98 millimeters, so in this case I actually had more than 3 feet. I probably had like 6 feet. I think mathematically it works that way. I had 9 points. So what's happening here? What's happening here is that I pointed here, and the camera doesn't know, because it has 9 points, that it needs to focus on LeBron. Obviously I want to get LeBron in focus. Now I got lucky in this shot, and he, of course I'm zooming tremendously, but you can see it's out of focus. As a matter of fact, in this one, to be honest, there is a little bit of motion blur too. I noticed that even at 1,000 of a second, especially when you're panning, it may be out of focus. But anyway, the reason I was showing you this example is that if you have it in 9 points and you point to the wrong player, then even if you have 9 points, it doesn't know. It thinks that I'm shooting this player, not LeBron. And if I had 21 points, it may be focusing on this player. I mean, so because it's around the center. So, well, actually, it would probably focus on this one. It's probably going to focus on the one that is closest to where I focus first. In this case, I had a similar situation. I have 9 points. Again, I'm trying to focus on LeBron. So this 9 points is not working. Again, 9 points. Well, in this case I missed LeBron completely, so here the camera didn't even know what the hell I was focusing on. By the way, something that I want you to notice is that I'm shooting, oh, here is a 2500 ISO. I'll show you a little later at 3200 ISO how little noise there is for those that own the D800. But anyway, that's a different subject, because people who own 5200 or 3200 or 3100, I mean, they know, you know, that the noise is different for the pro bodies. Here I'm talking about only the autofocus, okay? So you can see 9 points. Well, in this case I'm not going to blame the 9 points, because if I would have focused on LeBron I would have gotten him in focus. What I'm saying is, when you have several, this is a better example, you have several players next to each other, and the you see he's in better focus than Dwayne Wade, okay? So the camera sometimes doesn't know when you put it. You see here I'm focusing on Dwayne, okay? Again, I'm magnifying a lot, and let me show you some of the ones that were in focus. It's not like I got all of them out of focus, but here you have another good example. So I mean, he's in focus. Now you cannot tell that Wade may be a little bit out of focus, because obviously you know, you're not seeing him, but Dwayne Wade was probably not in focus in those pictures. The other thing is, when you're taking action shots, and I notice this now that I'm evaluating my pictures, sometimes 1/1000 of a second is not enough, especially with fast action like a basketball game, and when you have so little depth of field, and on top of that you know, you're panning, because you're basically going back and forth. That's why a lot of you know, journalists stand on this side at the end, you know, the end court, because it's actually easier to focus that way. If they're running towards you, you know, even though it's a little bit unpredictable, it's easier to focus. So here finally I got a good shot. It's not like I think I got a lot of good shots, but I'm showing you this example because, again, oh, so look at this. I changed here to single. And the reason why I changed to single, I'm still in continuous, but I changed to single. I'm almost at 200 millimeters, because what I noticed is, I said, you know what, the camera is trying to predict and it's not doing a very good job. Let me see if I can do a better job. Okay, so you know, I changed to single, and you know, most of my pictures when I made that change were in focus. Well, here I had it in single, but I'm focusing on him instead of LeBron. That's a different story. But you see here, focus, perfectly in focus, perfectly in focus. So, well, here is a little motion blur. Well, actually, it was, no, I didn't get him in focus. It's nothing to do with the motion blur. Perfectly in focus. So anyway, the bottom line is that even you don't always have to do what the book says. Okay, the book says that for sports, I mean, this is an unpredictable sport. So if I were doing what the manual says, I would have put it in 21 points or 51 points. Well, guess what? It would be focusing on so many different things. It would be difficult to focus. Now, if LeBron is the only one flying in the air, right, and I put it on 51 points, then of course, yes, I'm gonna get a you know, much better chance of getting him in focus. And that's why I think for birds, even though I usually use 9 points and sometimes single point, it probably makes sense if you're all the way zoomed in, because you basically have in the background the sky, and you know, so it's difficult for, you know, it's not like it's gonna get confused with the sky. I mean, so, well, anyway, so I mean, here is this is a good example of when you don't have motion blur. So a lot of my pictures were out of focus because I was at 1/1000 of a second, and I was just moving the camera too fast. Here I'm holding it steady, and of course it's perfectly in focus. By the way, here it gives me an opportunity to show at 3200 ISO, you know, there is almost no noise. I mean, obviously nobody's gonna look at it. This is like super crop. This is the full picture, but look at this. This is, you know, very sharp, and and you know, no problems with ISO. But anyway, this whole video was really to talk about the autofocus. I hope you have a better understanding on the autofocus, and my recommendation to you is not going to be to use necessarily what the book says or what I do, is to practice. To practice, you know, if you're shooting your kids in school, playing sports, or you know, if you're just a sports fan, just practice, 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 and then try the different modes. You definitely want to be in continuous mode, but you know, do not necessarily always put it in 9 points, 21 points. If you're still getting things in focus that is not what you want, try single and evaluate your pictures looking at where the focus point was. The other thing to get, and this is important, to get pictures in focus, here I had to go to 2.8, okay, because I was in ISO 3200 and I knew going to 6400, because here, what is my limitation? My limitation is I have to be at least a 1,000 of a second. When you shoot sport, especially fast sport like basketball, you have to go to 1,000 of a second or even more, okay? As a matter of fact, I think I would have benefited going to 1/1500th of a second and then gone to a higher ISO, okay? So that's why I have to go to f8. If I was shooting, say, at f5.6, you know, then I have much higher depth of field, or you know, longer depth of field, right? So if I have longer depth of field, for example, in this particular picture, he would be in focus, he would be in focus, and he would be in focus. So everybody would be in focus, and my chances of getting the person in focus would be, you know, multiplied 3, 4, 5 times when you're shooting. But then the beautiful pictures you see in Sports Illustrated and all those magazines is when you have a really long lens and the player is in focus and everybody in the background is out of focus. That's usually, look at Sports Illustrated and you'll see that that's usually the way to shoot sports. You want all the attention to be on the athlete and not on the spectators. The spectators, you want a little bit of their expression, you know, like here, but you really want to focus on the sport. Okay, well, thank you very much. I hope that you find this video useful.